Rob's Child. Nothing I say is investment advice, and I have no intention to replace any content of this book with these videos, but to supplement them and open them up for discussion. Today we are on chapter 35 of Security Analysis, titled Public Utility Depreciation Policies. It's important to remember during this whole chapter it's all about utilities, public utilities. So water, gas, and electric. First point, he writes how they often omit depreciation charges and it causes earnings to appear higher than reality. Once again, ad infinitum. Don't take earnings on face value, I think, is the overarching theme of so many of these chapters in this part of the book. But we go on. There's a very funny quote in page 465 at the bottom, and it's a quote that kind of just tries to nail in the point that you really do have to charge for depreciation. You can't just not charge depreciation. It's an important thing to have be discounted from your earnings in your income statement. And the quote goes like this, quote, and he's quoting Hatfield, a Hatfield classic sentence, and I quote, "All machinery is on an irresistible march to the junk heap, and its progress, while it may be delayed, cannot be prevented by repairs." Again, stuff breaks. The things making things, they wear out. You have to account for that when you are reporting how much money your company is able to make. And so this whole chapter goes through a bunch of different ways of how depreciation charges are charged and can be charged and should be charged. And one of the first things he goes through is talking about a minimum depreciation charge and how that can end up being not sufficient. So you have equipment that's breaking down that's going to need a lot of capital to replace or to fix, and then all of a sudden, it's a surprise to the investors that are like, 1 year that all of a sudden the earnings drop significantly because, the company actually has to pay to make that happen. And so that's one of the main issues. We then go into, I'm surprised he puts this in this chapter here, because this seems to be a little off topic as far as straight earnings go, but we're talking about dividends. And so, in addition to earnings being misrepresented, and I've seen this before in companies too, where you have a dividend that refuses to quit. They just keep paying it even if they can't afford it. And he's citing an example of that and how that's really bad, in particular for the bondholders. It's something I hadn't thought about before, is that, there's people that are holding the bond debt of this company that are watching this company pay out dividends to the shareholders when they're not even making enough money. And if you're holding that bond, you're probably thinking like, well, what's going on here? And so I'm happy to come across that, because I hadn't thought of it that way before. And once again, he's complaining about how on paper they're taking it out of surplus contingency reserves instead of charging the depreciation to earnings. And then next we have a subtitle going through a variety of depreciation policies. And he goes through 7 different methods of ways to charge depreciation. And I'm not going to go through all the details, all of them in this video. You have to read them. This is, this isn't something I think I'm going to be memorizing. It's something I think I might reference in the future when trying to figure out depreciation. If I'm really studying a certain company, seeing like, okay, what's the method? Why are they doing this? Well, and what does this mean exactly? And so there's a lot of good information right there. And then we have a section on, he says double accounting policies on depreciation is the next subtitle. In other words, the income statement and the tax statement not matching depreciation charges. And so what happens is, the company wants to look one way to the investors on the income statement, and they want to look a different way to the tax man, to make things work out to their advantage. And he suggests before, too, in the book here that, using the tax statement is better for analysis. And he details going 5 reasons why that is the case. And basically, we end up concluding that straight line basis method is basically the best way to do it. But yeah, the 5 reasons why using the tax statement is better. But then we go into everything that he says. There's always a but. So, but before that, he says, he restates examples of depreciation being too low, and it essentially tricks investors into false security. And then this is when he gets into the part where he talks about some cases of using non-tax depreciation is okay, and uses an example or two examples, I think, of liberal non-straight line basis where it's acceptable because the depreciation was liberal enough. But it sounds like usually that wasn't the case. And there's some history in here too. He goes through some of the history, and I'm guessing a lot of things have even changed since then. But he says, like in 1934, there were a lot of overvalued utilities because not enough depreciation was charged, and he apparently lived through this and saw how this was a problem, and states at the end of the chapter that things have gotten better in regard to that. But the main takeaways here, once again, are just being aware that depreciation exists, and different sectors are going to typically do things a little differently, and depreciation matters. That you do have to take that into account, literally. And that's pretty much this chapter. The utility of this chapter, again, when you're looking at the prices of any securities out there, understanding that they own stuff, and the stuff breaks, the stuff changes in value. Sometimes it can go up in value, sometimes it can go down in value. And all of these things affect directly the value of the securities that this company has issued. I think it's easy to ignore these aspects, when you're thinking of buying, even and this chapter was about public utilities, so I digress a little bit, but think about today with Tesla. They have these brand new factories, basically, relative to factories of car makers that have been around for almost 100 years at this point. Well, they not really, but you get the point, is that over time, these things that exist, they change value, they break down, they need to be repaired, they need fixing, they need maintenance charges as well as part of the depreciation, apparently. So these are very good things to consider in security analysis. And in particular, in this case, for this particular chapter, dealing with public utilities. I'm living in Florida right now, where they're actually they're spending a ton of money on upgrading the water system where I live right now. And so, these are pipes, even the pipes, they don't last forever. They need a certain amount of maintenance and to be rebuilt, replaced. But I digress. So that's the chapter. That's chapter 35. And that's all I have to say. All right, Rob's Child.